Hey guys, how's it going? So I'm here for my first of my Luukashist Reads videos, which are supposed to be kind of more in-depth thoughts about one or two books I've been reading this week. They're kind of modeled off of the Books Weekly series that Britta Bowler does, and also kind of off of ShakeTube videos where we all kind of gave our impressions and our thoughts, but they weren't necessarily a full-blown review. And I'm just doing that because I don't, during the semester especially, necessarily have the mental energy to be doing entire videos about one book. So this was my compromise between the sort of surface level discussion of a Friday Reads video and a more in-depth review. So yeah, I did want to just mention a couple books very quickly. I did finish a Johnson reader this week, and my verdict doesn't really change. I really love his essays, but the lives of Milton and Gray that were in here, I didn't really love. They kind of fell into the typical trappings of biography for me, where biography gets boring because it kind of degenerates into, you know, X went and did this, and then X went and did this, and then this happened, then X had to react this way, and then X did this. And that gets incredibly boring. So I will definitely be wanting to read more of Johnson's essays, but I don't know how soon I'll want to read his Lives of the Poets. But I did overall enjoy that volume. And then I also started to read this book, arguably by Christopher Hitchens. I ordered this with a Barnes & Noble gift card that I got from a friend for a Secret Santa thing we did. I got it also because I had read 5 of my books, and as you may all remember, I said that I would allow myself to buy a book as soon as I'd read 5 of my own unread books. And yeah, I'm just skipping around, reading what pieces strike my fancy. And I haven't been able to read that many so far, but definitely a very good prose stylist. I mean, he's incredibly well read too. Yeah, so anyway, I will probably be giving my impressions more in depth later on when I've read more of it, but I'm reading that. And so now on to the ones I want to talk about a bit more in depth. First is The Histories by Herodotus. This is widely considered to be the first ever work of history. So Herodotus was a Greek writer. This tells the story, the kind of early history of Greece. And it focuses in large part on Greece's conflict with the Persian Empire, because there were a few wars between Greece and Persia, kind of culminating in the Battle of Thermopylae and the Battle of Marathon, if I'm remembering correctly. And so yeah, so far it hasn't really gotten to that. It's gone through a couple of old kings who I certainly had never heard of and probably aren't that well known. But basically the big event was that there was this kingdom called Lydia, which was in kind of modern day Turkey, and it had this king named Croesus who kind of was an ambitious king, and so he went to the oracle at Delphi to ask whether he should attack the Persian Empire, because the Persian Empire was kind of ascendant at that time. And the oracle says, if you attack the Persian Empire, a great empire will certainly be destroyed. And it leaves it vague as to what empire it's referring to, but Croesus, the king of Lydia, of course assumes that it's the Persian Empire they're referring to, so he takes this as license to attack the Persians, and then he's defeated in spectacular fashion. His empire is destroyed. But Cyrus the Great, who is the king of Persia at that time, actually spares him, and kind of takes him on as a bit of an advisor. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic of Cyrus being advised by this older king who he had formerly gone to war with, and yeah, so that's just sort of a little bit of what Herodotus has gotten into so far. A lot of the storytelling is very sort of up close and personal. There's a lot of conversations which he could never have been present for. There's a lot of sort of almost folktale-like stories about kings losing their sons or things like this. Like Croesus had 2 sons, and one was this totally beautiful, strong son, and the other one was I think deaf, or not deaf, mute. He didn't talk, and so he got this prophecy that the one son, the very dashing good son would be killed off by a spear being thrown at him. And so Croesus goes through all these affairs trying to make sure his son doesn't die. He makes sure there are no weapons stored in like upper shelves so that they don't fall on him, and he keeps him kind of, I don't know if he locks him away, but anyway, he does everything he can to keep his son safe. But then at one point, this person from a foreign country comes to Croesus' court and asked to be housed there because he's committed a crime in the country he comes from, and so needs shelter. And so Croesus decides to shelter him. And this guy also asks at one point whether he could go out on a hunt of a great boar, I believe, and he wants to take Croesus's good son. And so eventually Croesus says yes. And so at one point, they're hunting the boar, and all the hunters, so they're there with a group of hunters, are in a circle around the boar, and they all have spears, and you can maybe imagine what happens. The guy across from Croesus' son accidentally throws a spear right into his face. So yeah, stories like that, kind of these almost more veering on mythological stories are in there. So for that reason, it kind of reminds me almost of reading the Silmarillion. Because it is supposed to be this comprehensive history as the Silmarillion is, and because it has this combination of large historical events and these more up-close and personal conversations and experiences of these mostly kings so far. And I'm loving that. I think Herodotus has a great flair for a good narrative. I posted a Goodreads update the other day, and I said that reading this feels a lot like watching my old favorite historical movies. I don't know if any of you have seen Kingdom of Heaven. It was a movie about the Crusades, and the theatrical cut was only okay. It was kind of confusing, but the director's cut is a great movie. And I don't know, I feel like I'm watching that when I read this, and I feel weird comparing reading this book to watching a movie, but it is very entertaining, I think. But that being said, it is also very confusing. There are a lot of names that Herodotus kind of throws at you, names of people, names of places, and names of groups of people, names of tribes and nations too. And so that kind of slows me down. I have to slow down and make sure when he speaks of someone, I know exactly who he's talking about. Sometimes I like to look up the place that he's referring to so I actually know geographically where it is. The one criticism I might raise of this particular volume, it's a Barnes & Noble Classics edition, is it doesn't have great maps. It does have maps, but they're not spectacular. So I have been looking up places. So for that reason, I'm reading it very slowly. I'm reading about 10 pages a day, which means I'll be reading this for more than a month. So I may not keep talking about it. I may just kind of set it aside and talk about other things I've been reading. So one last note that I want to mention about Herodotus that I am liking a lot is I mentioned how confusing all the names and peoples and places are that he names. But what he does, I think that does help with that, is that he goes in depth into the background of every person he meets. When he tells the story of Croesus' war with Persia, he doesn't necessarily go right into the background of Cyrus, the king that Croesus is fighting. But once the fighting is over and Cyrus has defeated Croesus, Herodotus kind of says, okay, now we will go into how Cyrus became king of Persia. And then he tells that story. So, and there are other instances where there's sort of a side character or a neighboring country that will sort of end up playing a small part. Where something has happened, and Herodotus won't just say they couldn't help that, or Croesus called on the help of this group of people, but they couldn't come to help because this happened. He won't just say that and then move on. He will go in depth about what is going on in that country that he's referring to, and goes into the background of people and stuff, and that can help because it helps you kind of give you a grounding in who these people are, what they are, and kind of gets their name in your head, sort of, gets it imprinted in your mind, so that when he refers to them in the future, you know who he's talking about. So yeah, I am really enjoying this. I'm taking it slowly, and, okay, so, the camera ran out of battery and I had to go replace it, and so some time has passed, so the lighting, so it might look like it's later in the day out here. But anyway, I had just finished up the histories, and now the last book I want to talk about is the Coriolanus by Shakespeare. So this is one of his later tragedies. It came after Hamlet, King Lear, and Macbeth, and all of his most well-known tragedies. This takes place in ancient Rome, like really ancient Rome, before Rome is actually an empire. And it's about this Roman general named Caius Marcius, who, at the beginning of the play, wins this great victory over the Volscians, who are an enemy tribe of Rome. And he takes this city of the Volscians called Coriolis. And so he's given the honorific title Coriolanus. When he gets back to Rome from that battle, basically, he has so much popular support from the people after his victory that his friends in the government kind of convince him to try to run for consul of Rome. But the problem is that Coriolanus has this huge disdain for the everyday people. He thinks they're pretty stupid and fickle and don't really deserve democracy. So here's this man who doesn't respect democracy trying to run for the head of a democracy. But anyway, he tries to kind of fake it a little bit. Tries to, there's this sort of dance that you're supposed to do when you run for consul. You're supposed to go out into public and ask people politely for their votes, even if you know they're already going to vote for them. He is supposed to show off his scars to them to impress them with his victory. And he hates this. He sees... he claims that it's because he doesn't want to seem prideful, or at least that's how I interpreted what he said. And that becomes very ironic later on, but anyway, what happens is he tries to do this, he does it a little bit, but then two tribunes, who are kind of the representatives of the people, turn the crowds against him. Essentially, they tell him about how he's anti-democratic and doesn't think highly of the people, and these things. And so they go on this huge riot against Coriolanus, and then Coriolanus, experiencing this riot, can't really, it might have been okay if he'd been able to kind of get a hold of himself and try to convince these people that these things that the tribunes are saying about him aren't true, even though they are true. But he can't. He just is so angry that he just goes on this huge long rant about how he doesn't think they deserve democracy and how stupid he thinks they are, and so, as you can imagine, that doesn't make them very happy. So he is expelled from Rome. The people vote to have him expelled for his anti-democratic views, and then the story goes from there. Coriolanus decides to try to... He actually teams up with the Volscians, who were the people who he'd been fighting originally, and he wants to come back and conquer Rome, because he figures if they're not going to honor him, he'll just destroy them. So yeah, that is the bare skeleton of the plot. And now, Coriolanus as a character, I think you can see how, probably see just based on the description, how he can really be reinterpreted and readapted for basically any point in time, basically anywhere on the political spectrum, to be sort of an allegory for current politicians. No names, but... so that seems like it must make this play have a wide appeal, but that political, those political overtones only go so far. But the character of Coriolanus, like him as a person, is just immature, an immature little boy, as he's called in the last scene of the play. He's called a little boy, and I can't disagree with that assessment. Basically it seems like the only thing he values is getting glory and getting honored for the things he's done, and when Rome refuses to do that for him, he just decides to destroy Rome, which is the very thing from which he wanted to be honored. And I mean, to me, only a young boy would react like that. And like I said, he's falsely humble when he says he doesn't want to show off his scars. I feel it's revealed later, based on my reading, that he really was just doing that to look good, to being sort of humble to look good, and clearly he is also anti-democratic. And now, in defense of his anti-democratic views, the citizens of Rome are sort of a character in their own right in this story, and they are shown to be pretty stupid and fickle. They turn on Coriolanus at the turn of a dime, and then later in the play they turn on the tribunes who had originally turned them on Coriolanus. So his assessment of the people isn't exactly wrong, but it's blockheaded to go out and say it in front of a huge crowd of people like this. He just can't control himself. And so yeah, I did not like Coriolanus as a character. So I wasn't quite sure what to make of this play when I finished it for that reason. Like, do I like this character? Do I like this story? What do I get out of this? But then I read Marjorie Garber's chapter on Coriolanus, and she got a lot more out of it than I did, clearly, which isn't exactly surprising. But she sort of sees Coriolanus as this man who really wants to be a sort of almost semi-mythological hero figure in a sense, and this sort of view of himself is not suitable for the realm of politics, because politics, it doesn't have time for heroes. You sometimes have to kind of do unsavory things. You have to be kind of deceptive. You have to do the dance. You have to put on a face and pretend to be happy to be somewhere. All things which Coriolanus clearly cannot do. And it seems to me that she sees Coriolanus' main character arc as realizing that this desire to be this godlike hero of some sort is just it's not what he is, clearly, and it's clearly not gonna get him through life very well. And she seems to see that as his main character arc. It's just that by the end of the play, he clearly still holds on to the immaturity that he had at the beginning of the play. He's called at the end of the play a little boy, and he still is very much ends this play acting like a little boy. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so anyway, I don't know if this will go down as my favorite play. I don't know the extent to which I agree with Garber's interpretation. But anyway, I found it interesting. I had a lot more feelings than thoughts about it, I feel like. So yeah, anyway, by the way, I really loved Garber's chapter, just really well written, and so many insights. She goes through the entire play, sort of, not necessarily scene by scene, but she goes through the entire plot and interprets along the way, and it's great. So yeah, anyway, that is what I have read this week. So thank you for watching. I wish my discussion of Coriolanus could have been a bit more coherent, but my thoughts on it weren't very coherent. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Bye!